Good afternoon, everyone. His Excellency, the Vice President, Ratu Joni Madraiwiwi, Director of Acria, Father Kevin Barr, Professor Wadan Narsey, Professor Jeffrey Bourne, Dean of Faculty of Business and Economics, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies, colleagues from the University, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the University and the School of Economics, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. A very special welcome to the Vice President, who is not a stranger to USP. And I want to thank him especially for his time this afternoon. We are, ladies and gentlemen, very pleased to join Acria in organizing the launch of Professor Narsey's report on just living wages. It is fitting that we do this, as Professor Narsey has been a long-serving academic member of the University of the South Pacific, and indeed academic in the School of Economics. I think he served the university for more than 30 years. And prior to leaving the university, Professor Narsey was also the director of the European Union-funded Employment and Labor Market Studies program at USP. This program is now managed by the School of Economics. We are pleased that this report will complement the work of the Employment and Labor Market Studies program at USP. Professor Narsey, once Professor Ron Duncan described him as one of the best, or the best economists that this region has produced for a long time. And we are very happy to have continued our association with him, and I want to thank him for his commitment in his association with the University of the South Pacific and indeed with the School of Economics. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for your time this afternoon, and it's my pleasure now to call upon Father Kevin Barr to talk a little bit about the work of Acria and also to introduce our chief guest for this afternoon.
For many years now, Acria has been involved in research on issues of poverty and inequality, and we've always stressed that we think that wages, just wages, are a key issue in the whole area of poverty alleviation. And the 1997 Fiji Poverty Report also stressed that overcoming poverty is not just a matter of providing more employment, but it was a matter of making sure that those in full-time employment received wages above the poverty line. Last year, we at Acria decided to commission a detailed report on the issue of just living wages. Acria is extremely happy with Professor Narsey's report. Its research is detailed, its message is compelling, and its recommendations are simple and affordable. We hope that many people will read it and seek to put its recommendations into practice. And especially Acria hopes that this is one way where an NGO can dialogue with government over an important policy issue. And we're very grateful that members of the Ministry for Labour are here today and will be present on Wednesday night when this report is debated. And we hope that that connection or the involvement of an NGO with government will be a fruitful way of pursuing dialogue on this issue of wages. Acria is very grateful to have Ratu Joni launch this report. Before becoming Vice President, he had some close links with Acria. He was our legal advisor, and also he was a member of one of our program advisory committees. Ratu Joni is an illustrious son of Fiji. He holds the traditional chiefly title, the Rokatui Bao, and he is also highly qualified academically because of his degrees in law. He's held the position of permanent arbitrator and High Court judge, and has also worked in private practice. Although we respect Ratu Joni for all this, I think he is held high in the estimation of the people for being a humble, wise, learned and approachable leader.
Eliminating poverty and promoting optimum levels of economic growth are the major challenges for the government. Increasing global competition created by the reduction of trade barriers has emphasized the need to reduce costs in order to retain an advantage in both the international and local markets. The report by Dr. Wadan makes a detailed examination of the operations of wages councils and analyzes the findings. What it concludes is that the levels of remuneration set by these councils in the wages regulation orders are sadly inadequate to meet the basic needs of workers. Given that a far larger number of the working population are covered by these wages councils and orders than unionized labourers, that has a significant effect on levels of poverty nationally. It is not an attempt to allocate blame or to demonize particular sections of our society. What it is sought to achieve is to determine whether the minimum rates of remuneration set by the councils and the processes for determining them adequately compensate workers. This is not an exercise to find scapegoats. The fact is that the responsibility for this state of affairs is one we all bear. The government has not taken a firmer lead in seeing to it that the Wages Council's mechanisms operated more effectively. The employers' representatives have effectively lobbied the Wages Councils to minimize the wage increases granted using economic hardship and market factors persuasively. And the workers' representatives themselves have had neither the means nor the inclination to put the case for their constituencies more assertively. In practice, wages councils have operated largely at the employer's behest because of the passiveness of other parties. There has been little challenge to the inability to pay pleas from the employers in the history of the wages councils. And this is because there has been no objective assessment of their books of account, their protestations of confidentiality respected. How then can the wages councils make independent assessments to be able to set rates that are fair to both parties? What is clear is that the government, through the Ministry of Labour and the Bureau of Statistics, must lift their performance. The effective working of the wages councils depend in large part on how these institutions perform their roles, the latter in the provision of timely and relevant statistics, and the former in taking responsibility for the effective working of wages councils. To that end, the secretariat of these wages councils must be better resourced and equipped. The livelihoods of a good portion of our workers depend on their effectiveness, and this cannot be left to chance. One of the factors in the weakness of the wages councils is the lack of appropriate statistics and information. This obliges both the Ministry and the Bureau to be more interventionist and decisive in their roles. The reluctance of employers to provide details of their financial accounts can be dealt with by way of adequate safeguards and appropriate undertakings of confidentiality. It is all too easy to repetitively cite globalization, competition, and the need to maintain relativities as justification for minimizing wage increases. It is in our collective interest that employers make profits, but if these are consistently earned at the expense of fair remuneration for wage earners without proper assessment, it is counterproductive. In the long term, it becomes detrimental to social peace and stability, for what it creates is an emerging underclass that is unable to make ends meet, and whom the government in turn has to make provision in its poverty alleviation programs. Our relatively poor economic performance in the last 3 or so decades has been conveniently and effectively used to restrict wage increases. Workers have borne the brunt of this economic rectitude. Yet our indifferent economic performance is also the result of low levels of local investment and reinvestment, as well as the repatriation of profits abroad as a consequence of political instability and economic uncertainty. In these circumstances, workers cannot be expected to shoulder the consequences alone, and that is why it is critical that the Ministry of Labour and the Bureau of Statistics, as well as the workers' representatives, take a more active and higher profile in the wages councils. There is no argument with the proposition that employers need to make a profit in order to continue in business and remunerate their workers. However, these levels of remuneration have to recognize the contribution made by the latter to earnings. It must be at levels that do not reduce them to states of penury. Therefore, some assessment has to be made independently of what levels are both fair to workers and ensure levels of profitability into the future simultaneously. Wadan makes some constructive recommendations in that regard, which the government, employers and workers' representatives alike need to consider with an open mind.
The statistics he has compiled make sober reading. They demonstrate the levels of need and want to which many of our workers and their families have been reduced. It is my earnest plea that this study prompt profound reflection on the part of all concerned. More particularly, I hope consideration is given to implementation of its recommendations as soon as practicable to address the ever-worsening situation of poverty in our midst. I am now pleased to launch the report commissioned by ECREA, Just Wages for Fiji, Lifting Workers Out of Poverty, by Dr. Wadan. Thank you and good afternoon.
ECREA for helping us to organize this launch, staff from the School of Economics, and finally, ladies and gentlemen, all of you for coming this afternoon and some refreshments before you leave the Senate conference room. Thank you very much once again.